The Whitmore Museum glittered beneath the April twilight, its limestone facade illuminated by spotlights that cast dramatic shadows across Fifth Avenue. Inside, the Spring Gala transformed the marble halls into a cathedral of wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto polished floors, champagne flutes clinked in rhythm with string quartets, and Manhattan's elite circulated through galleries wearing smiles as carefully curated as the art surrounding them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Elena Reeves moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, her museum badge identifying her as staff rather than guest. At 28, she had learned to navigate these events with quiet efficiency, ensuring accessible seating was available, checking that sensory rooms remained unlocked, confirming dietary accommodations. Her black dress was professional but unremarkable, her dark hair pulled into a simple knot. She belonged to the machinery that made evenings like this possible, not the spectacle itself. When Julian Blackwood entered the main gallery, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes tracked his movement with the hungry attention reserved for those whose decisions shaped markets. At 39, the CEO of Meridian Technologies carried himself with an authority that made the space around him feel charged. His tailored suit fit perfectly, his dark hair showed threads of silver at the temples, and his gray eyes swept the room with calculating precision. But it was the boy beside him who truly captured Elena's attention. Owen Blackwood stood close to his father's side. Noise-canceling headphones settled over his ears, his gaze fixed on the geometric patterns of the marble floor. He was 15, tall and lean like Julian, but where his father projected control, Owen radiated careful containment. His fingers traced patterns in the air, small movements that Elena recognized immediately as stemming behaviors. The whispers started almost instantly. "That's Julian Blackwood's son," a woman in diamonds murmured to her companion, her voice pitched low but not low enough. "The autistic one. I'm surprised he brought him. Poor man," another voice added, dripping with false sympathy. "Such a brilliant mind. But that child must be such a burden." Elena's jaw tightened. She had heard variations of these comments throughout her career, had watched her younger brother Marcus endure similar judgments in school hallways and parent-teacher conferences. The cruelty of pity disguised as concern never failed to ignite something fierce in her chest. She watched Owen's shoulders tense as the crowd pressed closer, watched him rock slightly on his heels as the sensory input overwhelmed his careful equilibrium. Julian's hand settled protectively on his son's shoulder, guiding him toward a quieter corner near a Calder sculpture. But the damage was done. Owen's breathing had quickened, his hands moving faster, seeking patterns to ground himself in the chaos. Then his tablet slipped from his fingers and cracked against the marble floor. The sound cut through the ambient noise like a gunshot. Owen froze, staring at the shattered screen that had been his primary voice, his connection to language when words wouldn't come. Without thinking, Elena moved. She approached slowly, deliberately entering Owen's peripheral vision so as not to startle him. From her bag, she pulled the sketchpad she always carried for accessibility programs and the charcoal pencils that left her fingers perpetually smudged. She sat on the floor beside Owen, heedless of her dress, and began to draw. The patterns came instinctively. Geometric shapes interlocking in precise ratios, architectural elements repeating in fractal symmetry. She had studied enough about autism to know that many autistic individuals found comfort in patterns, in the predictable beauty of mathematical relationships made visible. Owen's rocking slowed. His eyes tracked the movement of her charcoal across paper, following the lines as they emerged and connected. Gradually, his breathing steadied. Elena extended a charcoal pencil toward him without speaking, without demanding eye contact or forcing interaction. For a long moment, Owen simply stared at the offered tool. Then his hand reached out and took it. They drew together in companionable silence while the gala continued around them, two figures on the floor creating order from chaos. Julian watched from 3 feet away, his carefully maintained composure cracking for the first time in years. This stranger had done in minutes what most people couldn't manage in hours. She hadn't tried to soothe Owen with empty words or pull him back to normalcy through force of will. She had simply met him where he was and offered a different language entirely. When Owen's hands finally stilled and his posture relaxed, Elena stood slowly. She caught Julian's eyes and saw something unexpected there. Not gratitude, not yet. Something more complex. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of hope. "I'm Elena Reeves," she said quietly, extending her hand to Julian. "I coordinate accessibility programs here at the museum. Your son has an extraordinary eye for pattern and structure." Julian shook her hand, his grip firm. "Julian Blackwood. And this is Owen." His voice carried the weight of a man accustomed to control, but underneath lay exhaustion and something rawer. "Thank you for what you just did." Elena knelt again, this time addressing Owen directly. She placed her business card on top of the drawings they had created together. "We have quiet morning sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays, before the museum opens. Just art and space to create. You'd be welcome anytime." Owen's hands moved in a fluid gesture. "Thank you" in sign language, and Elena felt something shift in her chest. This brilliant, sensitive boy who the guests had whispered about with such casual cruelty had just offered her one of the most deliberate communications she had ever received. From across the gallery, an older woman in pearls and ice blue silk watched the interaction with narrowed eyes. Victoria Blackwood's lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval, her posture rigid with barely contained judgment. "Appropriate boundaries," she said loudly enough to carry, addressing no one and everyone, "are so important with special needs children." Julian's expression hardened, but before he could respond, Elena stood and met Victoria's gaze with quiet steel. She said nothing, simply acknowledged the comment with the briefest nod before turning back to Owen and Julian. "The offer stands," Elena said softly, and walked away before the trembling in her hands could betray how much the encounter had affected her. 3 days later, Elena's desk phone rang at 6:45 in the morning, catching her mid-sip of bodega coffee in the museum's empty education office. "Miss Reeves." The voice was crisp, professional, female. "This is Sophia Martinez, calling on behalf of Julian Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood would like to request a private tour of the modern art wing this morning at 7, with you as the guide, if you're available." Elena's coffee paused halfway to her lips. "This morning? As in today?" "Mr. Blackwood understands it's short notice. He's prepared to make a substantial donation to your accessibility programs in appreciation of your time." The mention of money made Elena's shoulders tense. She didn't want to be bought, but the thought of Owen, of his careful drawings and the way he had signed "thank you," made her response easier than it should have been. "The donation isn't necessary. Tell Mr. Blackwood 7 o'clock is fine." When she entered the modern wing 20 minutes later, Julian stood with Owen near the Rothko Gallery. Owen clutched a new tablet against his chest and a leather portfolio that looked worn from use. The morning light filtered through the skylights, painting everything in soft, diffused gold. "Thank you for accommodating us," Julian said, and Elena heard genuine gratitude beneath the formal words. "Owen hasn't stopped talking about your drawings." "Well, not talking exactly, but I understand," Elena said gently, then turned to Owen. "Would you like to see some of my favorite pieces?" What followed was unlike any tour Elena had ever conducted. She abandoned her usual script, instead allowing Owen to dictate the pace. When he stopped before Mondrian's Broadway Boogie Woogie, she let him sit on the gallery floor for 15 minutes, his tablet filling with rapid observations about mathematical ratios and color theory that made her breath catch with their sophistication. At the Rothko, Owen's fingers traced the air inches from the canvas, following the horizontal divisions of color. His tablet spoke for him in a neutral voice that somehow carried emotion through his word choices. Light moves through boundaries. Feelings have architecture too. Julian leaned against the wall, watching his son engage with an intensity Elena suspected was rare. His expression held wonder and something that looked like grief, perhaps for all the times Owen's brilliance had been dismissed as deficit. When they reached the Gehry installation, Owen opened his portfolio with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of drawings, building facades rendered in obsessive detail, tree branches mapping fractal patterns, water ripples captured in precise concentric circles. Each piece revealed a mind that saw the world in layers of mathematical beauty most people never noticed. "These are extraordinary," Elena breathed, and meant it. "Has he studied architecture formally?" He studied everything formally, Julian said, with slight bitterness. Private schools that tolerated him until they didn't. Therapists who tried to make him fit templates he was never designed for. I finally brought him home for specialized tutoring 2 years ago. He paused, his jaw working. You're the first person who's looked at his work and seen art instead of symptoms. Elena met Julian's eyes and saw past the intimidating exterior to the father who had fought battles she could only imagine. That's because it is art. Owen doesn't just see patterns. He understands how they communicate meaning. That's what all great artists do. Owen's tablet chimed. He had typed a new message, and when the mechanical voice spoke, Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Please, you see what I see. The words hung in the air between the three of them, weighted with significance. Julian's expression shifted, vulnerability breaking through his careful control. Elena, he said, and her first name sounded different in his voice, more intimate than it should. Would you consider working with Owen? Private art therapy sessions. I know it's unconventional, but you connect with him in ways no one else has. Elena's professional training screamed warnings about boundaries, about the power dynamics of working with a billionaire's son, about protecting her objectivity. But Owen was watching her with those perceptive eyes, and she remembered Marcus at 15, struggling to find anyone who believed in him. I'd need to involve my colleague Amanda Price, she said carefully. She's a certified art therapist and can provide proper oversight. This would be educational enrichment, not treatment. Whatever parameters you need. Julian agreed immediately. Name your rate, your schedule, your terms. Twice weekly sessions. At your home, since Owen's most comfortable there. And Mr. Blackwood, she held his gaze. This is for Owen. Not to impress me, not to prove anything. Just for him. Something flickered in Julian's expression. Respect, maybe, or relief that she understood the distinction. Understood. As Elena prepared to leave, a woman in a charcoal suit entered the gallery. She was striking, 40-something, with dark hair and an expression that could freeze water. Her eyes swept over Elena with the thorough assessment of someone accustomed to identifying threats. Sophia Martinez, she introduced herself, extending her hand. Julian's chief of staff. Elena Reeves. The handshake was firm, measuring. I'll be your point of contact for scheduling, Sophia said, then leaned slightly closer, her voice dropping. He doesn't let people in easily. Neither does Owen. If you're doing this for the right reasons, we'll get along fine. It was both welcome and warning, and Elena appreciated the directness. The only reason I'm doing this, Elena said quietly, is because Owen deserves someone who sees his gifts instead of his challenges. Everything else is secondary. Sophia studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Then we'll get along fine. 6 weeks transformed Elena's world in ways she hadn't anticipated. Julian's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower in Tribeca, but it was the converted studio space that took her breath away the first time she saw it. An entire floor of light-filled rooms with adjustable LED panels that could shift from harsh fluorescent to warm incandescent, depending on Owen's sensory needs. Walls covered in cork board displaying years of Owen's artwork. Specialized tables at varying heights, supplies organized with precise labels, and 3 separate, quiet zones, with weighted blankets and noise-dampening panels. It wasn't a display of wealth, it was evidence of devotion. The sessions developed their own rhythm. Elena would arrive at 3 o'clock on Tuesdays and Fridays. Owen would be waiting in the studio, materials already selected. They would settle into companionable silence, creating side-by-side, while late afternoon light painted long shadows across their work. Owen's art evolved before her eyes. The pure pattern work remained, but now it carried emotional weight. During week 2, he presented her with a portrait rendered entirely in geometric shapes, triangles for her sharp observance, circles for her patience, interconnecting lines for the way she built bridges between worlds. She kept it in her apartment, studying it some nights when sleep wouldn't come, marveling at how someone who struggled with verbal expression could communicate so perfectly through visual language. By week 4, Julian had stopped pretending to work in his adjacent office during sessions. He would appear with coffee, linger to watch, sometimes sit with his own sketchpad and attempt drawing with an endearing lack of natural talent. Those afternoons felt like something Elena had never experienced, domestic intimacy borrowed from a life that wasn't hers. Their conversations deepened in the spaces between art making. Julian described Catherine's death with careful control that couldn't quite hide his lingering grief. Elena shared stories of fighting for Marcus in overcrowded public schools where different meant deficient. They discovered parallel scars, different battles against the same prejudice that demanded conformity over acceptance. "You grew up in Queens," Julian observed one Friday evening, after Elena mentioned her childhood apartment. "It wasn't quite a question. Jackson Heights. 3 of us in 2 bedrooms until my dad died." She met his eyes. "You grew up in Connecticut, I'd guess. Old money family. New Jersey. Middle-class family." His smile was wry. The old money came from Catherine's side. They never quite forgave her for marrying beneath their expectations. The revelation shifted something between them. They weren't billionaire and struggling museum employee. They were 2 people who had both fought their way into spaces they weren't born belonging to, carrying children they would protect against any judgment. When Elena introduced Amanda Price during week 3, Owen took to her immediately. Amanda validated Elena's instinctive approach and began documenting Owen's progress with professional thoroughness that would prove crucial later, though none of them knew it yet. Marcus visited Elena's apartment one Saturday morning, finding her sketching patterns she'd learned from Owen. "You're falling for him," Marcus said without preamble, settling onto their worn couch beside her. Elena's charcoal paused. "Owen's brilliant. The connection we've built." "Not Owen." "Well, yes, Owen, but also the father." Marcus's voice gentled. "I recognize that look, Elena. You get it when you think no one's watching. Just be careful. People like him, they live in different worlds." "I know that," Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. The evening that changed everything happened during week 6. Julian invited Elena to stay for dinner, a casual suggestion that felt weighted with significance. Owen fell asleep on the living room couch halfway through the meal, exhausted from an intensive art session. Julian carried him to bed with such tender care that Elena had to look away, her throat tight with emotion she couldn't name. When Julian returned, he found Elena standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. He moved beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, and they stood in silence that felt more intimate than any conversation. "Thank you," Julian said finally, "for seeing him, really seeing him." Elena turned to face him, and the careful distance she'd maintained crumbled under the weight of his gray eyes. "He makes it easy. He's extraordinary, Julian. So are you." The words hung between them, and Elena knew with crystalline clarity that she was standing on the edge of something that would change everything. Professional boundaries, class divides, the safe life she'd built, all of it balanced on the precipice of this moment. But before either of them could cross that line, her phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Where are you?" "It's almost 11. The spell broke." Elena stepped back, gathering her bag with trembling hands. "I should go." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Julian didn't try to stop her, but something in his expression suggested he understood they were both fighting the same gravity, pulling them together. As Elena rode the elevator down to the lobby, she didn't know that Victoria Blackwood's investigator had already photographed her entering and leaving the building 17 times. Didn't know that legal papers were being drafted in Park Avenue offices. Didn't know that the art therapy sessions were about to become evidence in a battle that would test everything she believed about family, love, and the courage required to stand up for what's right. All she knew was that Owen Blackwood had looked at her artwork and said, "You see what I see." And somehow, impossibly, she had fallen in love with both the brilliant boy and his fiercely protective father. The whisper of connection had become something louder, and there was no going back. Victoria Blackwood arrived at Julian's penthouse on a Tuesday morning without warning, her lawyer Harrison Webb trailing behind like a well-dressed shadow. Elena was already there for Owen's session when the elevator doors opened to reveal the older woman's ice-blue gaze. "We need to discuss Owen's welfare," Victoria announced, sweeping past Julian into his office. Privately. But privacy proved impossible. Owen, wearing his headphones in the studio, sensed the tension radiating through the walls. His hands began moving faster, patterns becoming frantic scribbles. Elena stayed with him, drawing calming geometric shapes while her heart hammered against her ribs. In Julian's office, Victoria laid out her case with surgical precision. Photographs of Elena entering the building. Bank records showing payments. A report from Dr. Gerald Winters, a behavioral specialist who had never met Owen, recommending immediate placement at Ashford Academy, a residential facility specializing in compliance training. She's unqualified, Victoria said, her voice sharp as glass. A museum employee with no credentials, clearly targeting you through your vulnerable son. And you're so blinded by whatever this is, she gestured vaguely, disgust curling her mouth, that you can't see you're failing him. Julian's composure cracked. Elena has helped Owen more in 6 weeks than years of your approved therapies. Helped him? Victoria's laugh was bitter. He's dependent on her. That's not progress, Julian. That's manipulation. She leaned forward. I'm filing for custody unless you end this. Immediately. Dismiss her. Enroll Owen at Ashford. Or I'll ensure every court in New York knows you've prioritized your company over your son's needs. Elena appeared in the doorway, Owen clinging to her hand, his distress palpable. Victoria's expression hardened. You see? He can't even regulate without her. This proves my point. Julian stood, his voice deadly quiet. Get out. You have until the end of the month, Victoria said, gathering her papers. Choose wisely. After she left, Elena and Julian stood in the wreckage of certainty. Owen retreated to his studio, and for the first time since they'd met, he didn't reach for his art supplies. I should step back, Elena said, her voice breaking. If it helps Owen. No. Julian's hand caught hers. She wants us to hide. To be ashamed. I won't do that to him anymore. But the weight of Victoria's threat hung between them, heavy as stone. The custody petition hit like a media explosion. Headlines screamed about the billionaire CEO, his autistic son, and the mysterious art teacher. Paparazzi camped outside Elena's Brooklyn apartment. Her phone buzzed with calls from reporters, colleagues, strangers offering opinions on situations they didn't understand. Charlotte Whitmore summoned her to the museum director's office, where board members waited with tight smiles. Victoria's foundation donated $2 million annually. The board wanted Elena gone. I'm placing you on unpaid leave, Charlotte said, her voice strained. Until this situation resolves. Elena cleaned out her desk that afternoon, past programs she'd built, accessibility initiatives she'd championed. Grace found her crying in their apartment that evening. You could walk away, her roommate said gently. No one would blame you. But Marcus called later with different advice. I remember every teacher who gave up on me, he said. And I remember you, fighting when no one else would. Owen deserves that same fight. At Julian's penthouse, Owen had stopped creating art entirely. The tablet messages grew sparse. Dr. Chin examined him, documented his distress, but Owen's silence spoke louder than any medical report. Elena's deposition lasted 4 hours. Victoria's lawyer painted her as opportunistic, underqualified, emotionally involved with Julian in ways that compromised her judgment. Isn't it true, the lawyer pressed, that you have romantic feelings for Mr. Blackwood? Elena met his eyes. I have respect for a father who loves his son exactly as he is. If that's the crime you're alleging, I'm guilty. The photographs they showed her, entering Julian's building, laughing with Owen, standing too close to Julian at the museum, told a story that was both true and incomplete. Yes, she cared. Yes, the boundaries had blurred. But what they couldn't photograph was the transformation she'd witnessed. A boy finding his voice through art, a father learning he didn't have to fight alone. Charlotte called 3 days later. The board wanted your resignation. I told them to reconsider their understanding of accessibility and inclusion. Her voice strengthened. You're reinstated. With back pay. It was a small victory in a larger war, but Elena felt something shift. People were choosing sides, and not everyone stood with power and money. 3 weeks before the hearing, Elena received the formal request to testify as a character witness. Agreeing meant permanently connecting her name to this battle, ending any chance of career neutrality. Grace urged caution. Marcus urged courage. Elena found herself in Julian's library past midnight, both of them exhausted by depositions and legal strategy sessions. Sophia had gone home. Owen slept upstairs. For the first time in weeks, they were simply 2 people drowning in the same storm. I'm going to testify, Elena said. Julian closed his eyes. It will destroy your career. Maybe, but watching them paint Owen as broken would destroy something worse. She stood, intending to leave, but Julian's hand caught hers. They had been so careful, maintaining distance despite the gravity pulling them together. But fear and hope and exhaustion had worn away their careful walls. "I'm terrified," Julian admitted, his voice raw. "Of losing him. Of failing him the way I failed Catherine. Of not being enough." Elena's free hand lifted to his face. "You are everything he needs. You always have been." The kiss happened like gravity, inevitable, necessary. Julian's hands framed her face with surprising gentleness, and Elena felt 6 weeks of careful boundaries dissolve. This was what she'd been fighting against and fighting for. Connection that transcended class and circumstance. Love built on witnessing someone's truth. When they pulled apart, Owen stood in the doorway. He'd removed his headphones. His tablet screen glowed in the dim light, happy. Then he signed thank you and returned to his room. Julian and Elena stood in the silence, understanding they had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The hearing loomed. Victoria's threats intensified. But Owen was upstairs beginning a new series of drawings, working through the night on pieces he wouldn't show anyone yet. And Elena had found something worth fighting for. Not just Owen's right to be himself, but a family that chose each other stroke by stroke, boundary by broken boundary, until love became louder than fear. The family courthouse on Center Street felt nothing like the gleaming galleries where this story had begun. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across worn wooden benches. Victoria's legal team arrived with 3 expert witnesses, none of whom had ever spoken to Owen. Dr. Gerald Winters testified first, describing intensive behavioral interventions designed to eliminate stimmying, enforce eye contact, and train autistic teenagers to pass as neurotypical. He cited compliance rates and normalized behaviors with clinical detachment that made Elena's stomach turn. "The child requires structure," he stated. "Mr. Blackwood's permissive approach enables dysfunction rather than correcting it." Victoria took the stand wearing grief like armor. She spoke about Catherine, her perfect daughter, and Owen, her broken grandson. "I loved my daughter," she said, voice cracking. "And I love Owen. But love means doing what's best for him, even when it's difficult. He needs proper care, professional intervention. Julian's devotion is admirable, but misguided. And this woman," she gestured toward Elena, "she's exploiting a vulnerable family for financial gain." The prosecution showed edited video from the gala, Owen rocking, overwhelmed, while Julian stood nearby, apparently helpless. They omitted Elena's intervention, the way Owen had calmed through art. Then Julian's defense began. Dr. Isaiah Chin testified about neurodiversity, explaining that autism wasn't a disease requiring cure, but a different way of experiencing the world. "Owen doesn't need to be fixed," he said firmly. "He needs to be understood and supported. Mr. Blackwood has done exactly that." Amanda Price presented Owen's art portfolio chronologically. The progression was undeniable, from rigid patterns to emotionally complex pieces that demonstrated not regression but flourishing. "Art therapy isn't frivolous," she explained. "For nonverbal individuals, it's often the most authentic form of communication available." Marcus testified about Elena's fierce advocacy throughout his childhood, drawing parallels to Owen's experience. "My sister fights for people others have given up on," he said. "That's not opportunism. That's integrity." Sophia described Julian's leadership, how he'd restructured Meridian Technologies around Owen's needs without compromising success. "He doesn't choose between being a father and a CEO. He excels at both because they're inseparable parts of who he is." When Elena took the stand, Victoria's lawyer attacked immediately. "You have romantic feelings for Mr. Blackwood, don't you? I have profound respect for a father who refuses to let the world diminish his son." "That's not an answer." "Yes," Elena said clearly. "I love them both. That doesn't make my observations less valid. It makes them more so." Julian's testimony stripped away every professional veneer. He spoke about Catherine's death, about learning sign language at 3 in the morning, about the loneliness of loving someone the world called burden. "Owen is my son, not my project, not my tragedy. He's brilliant and sensitive and sees beauty where others see chaos. If loving him exactly as he is makes me unfit, then I'm guilty." The final day, the judge met privately with Owen. Through his communication device, he typed responses to her questions. When asked about his preferences, his answer was unequivocal: home, father, Elena. Then Owen's secret art series was revealed. 10 pieces documenting his journey. His mother's death rendered in fractured darkness, years of isolation in grays and blacks, and finally, light returning. The last piece showed 3 figures creating art together, titled simply Family. The courtroom fell silent. Even Victoria's lawyer had no cross-examination that could diminish what Owen had expressed through his work. 3 days of waiting felt like 3 years. Owen created obsessively, as though preparing for something none of them could name. Media analysts debated outcomes on cable news. Victoria remained confident, surrounded by her social circle's assurances. The courtroom filled again. The judge's expression revealed nothing as she began reading her decision. Custody remains with Julian Blackwood. Relief crashed through Elena like a wave. Julian's hand found hers beneath the table, their fingers interlocking with desperate strength. The judge continued, explaining her reasoning. Owen's clear preference, Julian's demonstrated competence, the professional validation of his parenting approach. This court recognizes that Owen Blackwood's needs are being met through methods that respect his neurodivergence rather than attempting to erase it. Miss Reeves' intervention, far from inappropriate, demonstrated the instinctive understanding this child requires. She looked directly at Victoria. "Madam, your love for your grandson is evident. But love without acceptance is ultimately harmful. Owen thrives not despite his autism, but as his authentic self." Victoria left the courtroom in tears, her certainty shattered. Outside, journalists swarmed. Julian made a brief statement about acceptance and advocacy, his voice steady despite the emotion Elena knew he was containing. Owen stood between them, and for the first time, he seemed comfortable with public attention, perhaps understanding his story mattered. Charlotte called that evening. "The board voted unanimously to offer you director of accessibility programs," with a significant raise. But Julian had already proposed something different, directing a new art therapy center he was funding. Elena accepted, choosing meaningful work over institutional prestige. That night, as they celebrated in Julian's penthouse with their small circle of genuine allies, Owen completed a new portrait. Elena, rendered in his distinctive geometric style, titled simply Family. 6 months transformed their landscape entirely. The Meridian Center for Art and Neurodiversity opened in a renovated Brooklyn warehouse, all light and accessible design. Elena assembled a team including Amanda and several specialists, creating the program she'd always dreamed of building. Owen attended 3 times weekly, not as patient, but as artist in residence, his work displayed prominently. Younger children watched him create, seeing possibility in his confident strokes. Julian had restructured his life deliberately, working from home 3 days weekly, setting boundaries with Meridian Technologies, delegating more to Sophia, who now served as co-CEO. His relationship with Elena had deepened beyond crisis into something sustainable, mundane arguments about dishes, profound conversations about their future. Elena's mother visited from Florida, meeting Julian and Owen with maternal assessment that eventually softened into approval. Marcus completed his degree and began part-time work at the center. Even Grace and Sophia became unlikely friends, both fierce protectors of this unconventional family. Victoria exercised her supervised visitation occasionally, encounters still fraught, but slowly thawing. During one session at the center, she watched Owen mentor a younger autistic child, something shifting in her expression. Not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. When Julian proposed on an ordinary evening, watching Owen paint, it felt inevitable. "Will you build this life with us? Permanently?" Elena said yes, insisting on a long engagement to ensure their relationship survived beyond crisis mode. Owen's most ambitious work, a multimedia installation about communication beyond words, was selected for the Whitney Museum. As that exhibition approached, they faced new questions about visibility and advocacy. But tonight, in their renovated life, Elena sat between Julian and Owen, all 3 creating art in comfortable silence. This was the masterpiece they had built, not perfect, but genuine. Not easy, but worth every battle. Owen signed something to Elena. She smiled, understanding perfectly. "I love you too." The Whitney Museum's 4th floor had been transformed into an immersive experience that challenged every assumption about communication and connection. Voices Without Words opened on a crisp October evening, drawing art critics, disability advocates, and families who had lived the stories these pieces told. Owen Blackwood's installation occupied the central gallery. Visitors entered through a corridor of mirrors and fractured light, experiencing sensory overload through deliberate design, overlapping sounds, shifting patterns, competing visual stimuli. Then, gradually, the chaos resolved into meaning. Mathematical patterns emerged from apparent randomness. Colors harmonized. The overwhelming became beautiful, and viewers understood. This was how Owen experienced the world, not as deficit, but as different architecture. Elena stood beside Julian at the gallery entrance, watching Owen guide visitors through his work using his tablet and confident gestures. At 16, he had grown into himself, no longer the overwhelmed boy from the gala, but an artist claiming space for his vision. Victoria arrived alone, her usual entourage absent. She moved through the installation slowly, pausing at each element. When she reached Owen, he watched her with those perceptive eyes that missed nothing. She lifted her tablet, typing carefully. "I'm proud of you." Owen read the words, then signed something Elena recognized. "Thank you, grandmother." Victoria's composure cracked. Tears traced careful paths through expensive makeup, and for the first time since Catherine's death, she embraced her grandson without trying to fix him. It wasn't complete healing. Years of prejudice couldn't dissolve in a moment, but it was beginning. The evening's panel discussion drew a standing room crowd. Elena spoke about art therapy and neurodiversity, her voice steady with authority earned through experience. Julian discussed Meridian Technologies' new initiative recruiting neurodivergent employees, crediting Owen and Elena for teaching him that different perspectives strengthened rather than weakened organizations. When Owen's turn came, his communication device projected words onto screens throughout the space. Art shows what words cannot. I see patterns everywhere. They tell stories about connection, about finding order in chaos, about being understood. Thank you for listening to my voice, even when it doesn't sound like yours. The audience erupted in applause. Several families approached afterward, parents of autistic children who saw possibility in Owen's success. He demonstrated remarkable patience, showing a young girl his sketching techniques, becoming the mentor he had needed years ago. Charlotte Whitmore attended with several former colleagues, approaching Elena during the reception. "I should have supported you more forcefully from the beginning," she admitted. "You were right about what accessibility really means." Dr. Chun brought 3 families from his practice, introducing children to Owen's work and watching their faces light with recognition. Marcus delivered an impromptu speech about his sister's lifelong advocacy, his voice thick with emotion. Sophia announced the Neurodiversity Employment Initiative with typical efficiency, already planning implementation. As the evening wound down, Julian and Elena stepped onto the museum's terrace overlooking Manhattan's glittering expanse. The city that had witnessed their beginning now watched their next chapter unfold. "June wedding?" Julian asked, his arm around her waist. "June wedding," Elena confirmed, leaning into his warmth. "Small ceremony. Just family." "Define family," Julian said with slight smile. Elena thought of Marcus and David, Grace and Sophia, Dr. Chun and Amanda, Charlotte, and all the families from the center. "Everyone who chose to stand with us. That's a lot of people. We're lucky that way." 3 months later, Owen worked in his studio at the Meridian Center, part of the building but distinctly his own space. Supplies organized precisely, natural light streaming through tall windows, walls covered with works in progress. His next series explored themes of growth and transformation, abstract pieces that captured the feeling of becoming rather than being. Taped to his easel was a photograph, Owen between Julian and Elena at the Whitney opening, all 3 smiling at the camera. Owen had titled it in his distinctive hand, "My Family." Below, the center hummed with creative energy. Children drew and painted, finding voices beyond words. Parents learned that different didn't mean less. And in offices above, Elena and Julian built something larger than themselves, a legacy not of wealth but of acceptance. They had each found their voice through art, through love, through the family they had built stroke by stroke, choice by choice. What began with a whispered connection at a gala had become a masterpiece none of them could have created alone. Owen added another line to his canvas, the pattern emerging exactly as he envisioned. His tablet chimed with a message from Elena. "Dinner at 7. Your father's cooking." He smiled, signed home to himself, and continued creating beauty from the patterns only he could see. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.